I stood by the folding chairs and watched my cousins laugh. Rain hit the windows in thin sheets. The room smelled of lilies and coffee gone cold. The lawyer read names and figures. My cousins clapped for numbers. I held a coin in my palm. It was small. It was worn. It had an edge nicked by time. My name came last. The lawyer said, "To Ethan Hale, a coin and a letter." Leela snapped a photo for her story feed. Darren smirked and showed off a new watch. The room chuckled. A woman in the back said, "How poetic." The laugh cut like a blade. I folded the coin into my jacket and left without a word. I had thought the loss of my father would make me numb. The funeral had dug a different hollow. People spoke as if grief were a currency they could spend. My mother, Miriam, stood quiet. Her hands trembled. She looked at me with a small, fierce smile that said, "Stay steady." I stepped out into rain. I breathed air that tasted like sea and iron. I opened the letter on the bus. The first line read, "Follow the moves." My grandfather, Silas Crow, had been a man few people understood. He taught at odd hours. He fixed clocks with the patience of a man who loved a steady tick. He ran a tiny repair shop near the dock. Folks called him stubborn. Folks called him strange. I called him Granddad. He had a limp from a year nobody liked to name. He never chatted about money. He gave advice in questions and trusted silence to do the rest. 2 months before his funeral, he had asked me to meet him at low tide. He wore an old coat and a wool cap. He sat on a bench and handed me a coin. His fingers were blue with cold. He did not speak much. He asked me to promise 3 things. Keep one secret, help someone who needs it, play chess when lonely. I promised. He smiled in a way that held a whole life. The coin had no shine. Its face held a small crest and a date. A line had been scratched across the rim. I could not read the script. The letter inside the envelope had a code written in chess notation and a list of coordinates. I had held a chess piece twice in my life. I thought a pawn merely moved forward. The game had a language I did not know. My cousins mocked my coin on social platforms. Leela made a reel and called it a relic. Darren posted a shot of his watch with a caption about legacy. Family group chat exploded with memes. The mocking stung in a way the grief did not. People measure value by show. I measured value by weight, by use, by whether an object mended things. I rode a bus to the harbor. The coin sat heavy in my pocket. The harbor smelled of tar and kelp. Boats rocked in soft rhythm. A sign read "Crow Repair" with faded letters half gone. The map coordinates led me to a narrow lane. A painted chessboard marked the door of a small hall. Wood on the paint had faded to blue. A bell rang when I pushed the door. Inside, a dozen people hunched over boards. A boy taught a girl a night move. An old man tapped pieces with slow fingers and nodded as if each move were part prayer. Marco introduced himself. He had hands that carried calluses from rope and tool. He said Silas had started the chess nights years back. He had a key ring with a charm that matched the scratch on my coin. Marco smiled and gave me a grip that felt like grounding. This place had no big sums. It had ledgers with tiny entries, names of families, notes of repairs done for little or no payment, a list of small loans to fishermen after storms, a record of materials bought on credit for young workers, a ledger that showed repeated kindness and tiny trusts. The numbers were modest. The impact was plain and steady. Silas had kept the ledgers for a town that depended on steady hands. I learned chess in pieces. Marco taught notation like a code. He moved a queen and said, "A pawn that lives on becomes something else." He spoke as if telling a truth about people. I played and lost and learned to read the map. The chess move on my letter was QH5. Marco tapped the square on the board. He said, "Old Silas liked odd clues." He did not explain more. Silas had arranged a web. It looked thin if you only glanced. It looked sturdy if you stepped closer. Small workshops, small rental properties, trusts under different names, leases with local clauses, a fund registered in a county where paperwork was simple and oversight close to the ground. The relatives had taken the shiny things. They had walked from the funeral with creditors and photos. Silas had left a network that kept wages steady and roofs held over heads. He had no bank account with a lump sum. He had built systems that paid people by work. My cousins arrived in suits and loud voices. They posted stories and expected applause. They expected the town to bow. They expected quick profit. The town watched. Some nodded with old memory. Some crossed their faces with doubt. People had a streak of fairness. People also had short tempers. Priya Shah, Silas's lawyer, met me in a small office and laid out papers. She spoke with order and a voice that did not move much. Her age showed in silver at the temples. Her words had the weight of law. She explained how Silas had split property into many small companies. Each company held a shop or a workshop. Each lease favored local tenants. Each trust required community oversight before any asset could be consolidated or sold. No single document had a giant number. The value was in flow and in work. Darren believed law would bow to greed. He hired an expensive team. He tried to find a hole. He wanted to sell and cash out quickly. Leela wanted a flashy sale and an image for her following. They spoke loud about entitlement. They did not ask who would lose if they stripped buildings and sold them to outside buyers. They lacked a sense for how small gains harm steady lives. The town pushed back in small ways that made a difference. A carpenter refused to bid on a demolition. A seamstress spoke about the apprenticeship Silas had paid for when her father fell ill. A child spoke at a meeting about the chess nights that kept his afternoons sober and focused. Silas had built a safety net of small favors, of trust extended and returned. The assets looked ordinary when read by numbers. Their real value showed in the hands they steadied. A video message surfaced on an old tape. Priya had it transferred from a dusty player to a drive. Silas sat in a room with a lamp and a chessboard. His voice had the rasp of sea wind. He looked straight into the camera. He said, "Ethan, if you are watching this, you hold a pawn and a promise. Play slow, keep your temper, give people time, make moves that help work live." He smiled without warmth, more like a mapmaker pointing to a route. The message had more than advice. It listed names of people owed small debts, parcels given under trust, a set of accounts held in trust for veterans, for widows, for apprentices. He had found a way to hide generosity inside rules. He had used legal boxes to protect the town from outside buyers, who would ride through with cranes and silence. A twist came like a storm. At a meeting, a man named Jonah, who had been listed in one ledger, stood and spoke. He said Silas had once saved his sister from eviction with a small loan. He said Silas had helped his trade keep going when the harbor froze. He said Silas had another family in a village south of the town. A hush fell. I expected shame in the faces of those who loved Silas. I found instead a warmth. The people who had known this other family spoke gently. They had called Silas brother. They had called him anchor. Silas had kept two circles. One lived by the dock. Another lived inland under old oaks. He had woven both into one net. He had made small companies to shelter both groups and then used the rules of lease to ensure locals got first claim. The relatives had expected the usual pile of cash. They found communities. They found obligations in law and memory. They felt exposed in new ways. Conflict grew. Darren sued. He spoke of fraud and secrecy. He said Silas had deceived heirs. Leela posted clips accusing the town of mob mentality. The feeds lit up with hashtags and hot takes. People took sides. The town had to stand firm and legal. Priya moved with care. She opened safe boxes. She read clauses aloud slowly. The legal fight was tight because it wore many faces: greed, family loyalty, old promises, legal design. Each side had reasons that felt honest to them. I thought of my own faults as the fight moved on. I had a temper when people spoke with scorn. I held grudges longer than I should. I avoided money talk. I hid my fear under a stiff smile. I had taught teenagers in a room with no heat. I had argued for books instead of profit. I had stayed small because it felt honest. Those traits had shaped choices. They had also limited me. I resisted power when power could have helped me do more. The ledger made me face a fork. Hold to my simple life or step into responsibility that needed a new skill set and bigger patience. Marco pushed me to learn. He said, "Life is chess, not boxing. Make moves that keep hands open." He taught patience with boards and with words. The town had people who argued but who also fixed nets and taught kids. The conflict forced me to decide whether to speak in public, to step into the trust board, to take responsibility for Silas's design. I did not want the role of a leader. I feared mistakes. I feared failing people who trusted me. Those fears nudged into action. I showed up at meetings. I listened more than I fought. I started to write checks and notes. I found a steadier voice. Silas had placed small puzzles along his route. A set of keys with a code matched the scratch on my coin. A letter hidden in a seam in a jacket had coordinates. A chess move pointed to a ledger buried in a box in a place where paint flakes fell on the floor. The clues had a rhythm. They required time and work to read. They required trust in small hands. The plan rewarded patience. Darren's team found a clause to press. For a moment it looked like a gamble might pay. They sought to force a sale and clear management. The town rallied in small ways. Apprentices posted stories about jobs Silas had created. Mothers talked about the night Silas left blankets at a door during a storm. People emailed the county. Priya filed motions to enforce the trust structure. Legal language moved slow but solid. There was a scene where Leela cornered me in a cafe. She had smoke in her eyes from nerves and perfume from a brand always visible in her posts. She laughed hard in a way meant to cut, then paused as if the laugh had lost its edge. She said, "You took a coin and ran to a hobby hall. You let them make a legend." I let her words sit. I replied, "Silas left work for a town. He did not leave a number." She scoffed. "So you win by being poor and moral." I felt my jaw tight. I said, "No. It is about steady work, about keeping roofs on heads." She stared like she could not see the point. Then she turned and left. The fight sharpened. A key twist appeared when a ledger showed a clause securing a charter. The charter required a local board with 5 members chosen from a list Silas had compiled. The list included names of people who had been helped and people who had helped others. It included people who had proved themselves with sweat and consistency. It included apprentices Silas had once hired and taught. Priya read the clause aloud. It said assets could move only with board consent, and with proof the move did not harm local work. Darren argued the charter was unfair. He argued it deprived heirs of common rights. He filed suit. The court answered with injunctions and slow calendars. The town held a meeting in which voices rose and then bowed. One woman spoke and said, "Silas made his life one long loan. Payments were not cash but faith and labor." Her voice cracked and the room bent toward her. People remembered small things that had saved them. Memory became proof. My inner life grew heavy with choices. Leadership required me to study papers, to learn tax terms, to ask questions I had never asked. My old habits of avoiding risk did not work here. I had to trust people with power. I had to take a seat at a table where language mattered. I made mistakes. I spoke publicly with rush and said a line that read like pity instead of respect. I apologized later. I learned to listen first and speak last. My growth in small steps mirrored the chess lessons Marco had given me. I had to think 3 moves ahead. A smaller twist arrived when a property sale offer from a developer surfaced. The developer wanted space by the dock to build a line of shops geared toward tourists. The money looked clean and loud. Some in town tempted at the numbers. The developer promised jobs, a glossy future, new faces wearing new shoes. Priya warned about clauses in the offer that would let outside owners raise rent sharply. The town hesitated. A seamstress who had learned trade at Silas's shop said, "If they take this, my apprentices have no roof." The choice felt heavy and immediate. I walked into the chess hall one night after a long council session. Marco waited with a board. He put a pawn forward. I looked at the board and then at him. He said, "Sometimes the right move looks small." I moved a rook into a line that surprised him. He laughed and nodded. "Good. You think like a man who knows the value of a step." The chess match felt like life. The town later voted to reject the developer offer. They voted to hold assets for local use. The vote was thin and fragile, but it held. Darren grew reckless. He leaked documents to a reporter who spun a headline about secrecy and old men who played games. The story hit feeds and divided audiences. People outside the town saw a drama of family greed. They did not know apprenticeship or bread lines. The headlines called Silas mysterious and accused him of hiding wealth. The words stung. Some in town felt exposed. Others felt seen for the first time. In the heat of the conflict, I found a letter from my father among Silas's papers. My father had died years ago. He left a short note in loose script. He wrote about pride and sacrifice. He said, "Ethan, you are quick to protect what you love but slow to take what needs fixing." He told me to watch my temper and to use my stubbornness for service. The note felt like a small lift. It pushed me forward. I thought of a father who had taken night shifts to buy a book. I thought of a mother who patched clothes with careful stitches. My roots called me to steady work. A second twist folded into revelation when an accountant found an unnoticed clause proving Silas had set aside a small pooled fund for training new tradespeople. The fund required outreach to youth and a board to place apprentices. The fund had enough to keep workshops open if used carefully. It was not a pile of cash to burn. It matched Silas's pattern. Build a system rather than hand over a check. The cousins pressed a last gambit. Darren sought an emergency hearing. He wanted management rights. The hearing fell on a Tuesday morning. I sat in a small room with Priya and the town's few elders. Judges asked precise questions. Representatives for Darren argued loudly in a crisp tone. The town's people brought statements about apprentices, rent saved, life changed. When the decision arrived, it read like the slow tide. The court recognized the charter. It upheld the trust's intent to favor local work and small tenant protections. Darren's motion to seize assets stalled. He posted a long diatribe online and then deleted it. Leela unfollowed town profiles and posted a photo of a luxury hotel room. The relatives left in a rush of anger and self-righteousness. They had one small things. They had lost a community's trust, which to them felt unimportant. Victory did not look like fireworks. It looked like a ledger balanced and a school bell ringing. It looked like a seamstress getting a check to buy thread for apprentices. It looked like Marco teaching a new boy to pick a knot and not be timid with rope. The town breathed a mild, steady relief. I had to face choices about my life. Silas's trust required someone with a steady hand on small operations. Priya asked me to join the board. She said, "You are part of the net he built more than you know." I thought of my quiet life of teaching and a small flat. I thought of the coin in my pocket and the list of names Silas had left. I thought of my father's letter and of my mother's quiet strength. I took the seat. I told myself I would take no salary. I would teach chess nights and run a schedule for apprentices and sign checks for repairs. I would answer calls at night. I would learn mortgage lingo and grant applications. My life shifted in simple moves. I signed minutes and learned to read balance sheets. I sat in meetings with men who smelled of varnish and with women who had a knack for numbers. I spent nights at home reading trusts aloud to myself until the legal language lost the edge of fear. My temper gave me trouble when arguments heated. I had to breathe, step back, and ask questions softly. Each time I did this, I felt the old teacher in me grow stronger and the shy man in me shrink. The town changed too. The repair shop had a list of apprentices. A program paid by the pooled fund offered 3 months of safe work and skill. A young plumber named Omar who had lost his father found a mentor. A girl named Leela, no relation to my cousin, won a scholarship for carpentry. People who had been on the edge found a solid floor. Small victories showed up in small bills paid and in mouths fed without fuss. There was a final quiet reveal from Silas's tape. He had spoken of chess and of people. He had written, "If you want to test a man, ask him how he treats a pawn. If he cares for the smallest piece, he will respect the king." He ended with a line I still hear when nights are long. He said, "The loudest wins in a moment. The steady wins across a life." Darren tried one last lawsuit months later. It failed for lack of cause. He burned money on lawyers and bad press. He lost time he could not get back. Leela returned once with an apology and a voice stripped of posture. She said she had felt empty when she counted cost. She wanted a place to belong. I listened. I offered a seat at a community dinner. She came once and left again. She remained on the edge. I found new quirks in myself. I rubbed the coin in my pocket when tired. I hummed a tune my father had sung while grading papers. I kept a list of names on a small card and checked it like a roster. I taught chess to teens and told them to think of moves and consequences. I stopped being afraid to ask for help. I let a lawyer walk me through wording I did not know. I learned to forgive in small ways and to set boundaries in stronger ways. The biggest change came when a developer again approached the town with a revised plan. He pitched a complex of shops with a promise to hire locals for menial tasks. He offered more money. This time the town ran a tight evaluation. We asked for commitments written in paper with teeth. We required training numbers and wage floors and a local review board. The developer balked. He wanted freedom to raise rent later. He left. The town had learned to say no without drama. Months after the funeral, it was quiet enough to notice small things. A child learned to tie a knot cleanly. A widow received a repair bill paid from the fund. A board meeting ended and someone stayed to help move a broken table. Silas's ledger sat on my desk like a map. Names on the pages had living breath behind them. The coin on my shelf lost its edge and gained a patina. It felt less like evidence and more like a tool. Sometimes I sat on the bench by the harbor and watched boats come in. I thought of choices and of moves. I thought of how one man had refused to hand the town a check and instead built a system. I thought of how small kindnesses had rippled. I thought of my own growth from a teacher who taught history to a man who managed trust and apprentices. I had learned to balance stubbornness with service. My mother came to a board meeting once and sat near the back. She clapped with the others when a training program opened. After the meeting, she hugged me and said, "He was proud of you." I folded into the hug and felt all the history of small acts and sacrifices. We spoke seldom about money and more about purpose. She said once, "You kept your promises to the man who taught you how to sit still and listen." I said, "I kept them because he left more than instructions. He left an ethic, a way to place trust in work." A final twist came in a letter left under a floorboard in Silas's shop. Inside, a map pointed to a patch of land inland where he had rented a small house. The house had a garden and a small family who lived there. Silas had helped them with a down payment decades earlier. They had returned kindness to him when he needed care. The family came to a town meeting and spoke not with accusations but with gratitude. They held eyes with us like two halves of one whole. Everyone realized Silas had not hidden wealth to hoard. He had scattered it like seed to grow a community. Years later, when rain ticked on the roof and chess knights gathered a younger group, I took the coin out and ran a thumb over the nick. The coin did not change fate. It had opened a route. Fate still required work. People still needed jobs and roofs and mentors. I had learned to sit in meetings where language shaped futures. I had learned to sign checks that mattered and to say no when greed threatened to sweep in. I had also learned to hold boundaries. My cousins called less. Leela sent a birthday note with a short apology. Darren sent a bill for a service he wanted. I sent him a polite refusal and explained the charter. He lashed back in a message full of pride and hurt. I did not reply. Setting limits felt like a small act with a large seat. What I learned about character from all this is simple and hard. A person's traits show in small choices. If you are quick to anger, you will make mistakes in public power. If you are slow to act, you might miss an urgent repair. If you refuse to learn, you will fail to lead. If you hold stubbornness without empathy, you will break trust. If you teach patience and keep to humble work, you will build structures that last. Silas had weaknesses. He had secrets. He also had a stubborn ethic. Values are active. He did not preach, he fixed. He loaned. He filed paperwork to protect the weak. People in the town had arcs too. Marco's hands grew steadier as he taught. Omar took an apprentice and later opened a small side business. The seamstress hired another, who then taught a neighbor's child. These arcs show how modest choices compound into change. I have faults. I read my temper like an old map of traps. I have pride that will flare when people attack the work. I have empathy that drives decisions too soft at times. My arc moved from reluctance to stewardship. I did not seek power, but power found a pattern of service. I had to learn rules I once scorned. I had to grow patient. Twists in life will test your flaws in new ways. A man who avoids money might resist using funds in an efficient way. A man who hates loudness might underplay the voice needed to hold a board meeting. You must face flaws with small practices. I made lists. I practiced lines to speak calmly. I consulted an accountant before meetings. I learned the language of law and money enough to ask sharp questions. I failed sometimes. I apologized. Apology repaired better than silence. Plot turns in our lives need human faces. The relatives who mocked became a caution in my notebook of values. The town folk who helped rescued me from cynicism. The lawyer with her steady files taught me respect for rules. The boy who learned chess taught me how young people hold hunger and focus. Relationships test motives and show growth. Dialogue in this life rarely served only one purpose. Leela's barbs hid insecurity. Darren's loud boasts masked fear of being small. Marco's quiet sentences held warmth and admonition. Priya's careful phrasing forced us to be precise. Over time, words shaped action. I learned to listen for subtext. When a person says, "I need a job," they often mean, "I need a purpose." When a person says, "I want to sell," they often mean they feel trapped by upkeep. The art of conversation in this work is to find meaning without turning words into weapons. A strong ending does not erase every wound. It ties loose threads into a fabric that holds. The town held. The fund paid apprentices. The ledger kept its list of names. Silas's grand plan proved modest in appearance and potent in effect. The relatives who left with flashy things had to face a quieter emptiness later. Some returned humbler. Some never did. Life moved on. One night, years after the funeral, a woman whose roof had been repaired came up and held my hand. She said, "My son has a job now. He will not leave the town without work." Her eyes filled with steady light. Those small sentences felt larger than any headline. I thought of a pawn reaching the far side of the board and choosing a piece. I thought of Silas bending over clocks and fixing their hands. If you hold a small gift in your palm, look deeper. Value shows itself in function and in who benefits. Fame is loud and short. Steady work is slow and lasting. Hold boundaries when needed. Teach young hands to work. Sign checks with care. Listen. Learn chess moves and life moves alike. I will end with this question for you. Have you ever had to set a difficult financial boundary with family? How did it turn out?